Sometimes it tries to share the sometimes it tries to share the wrong screen. You see the presentation mode instead of the actual current.
We see your presentation.
Okay,
Thank
perfect,
you.
perfect. All right, thank you very much, folks. I'll stop the ado and I'll begin my presentation. So my name is Joe Mauser. My role is communications manager with Beavers Northwest. Beavers Northwest is a small local nonprofit. We operate throughout the Puget Sound region, all the way down from Olympia to Bellingham, but we're based out of the Seattle area. It's where we do most of our work. Today, I'll be presenting on beavers as ecosystem engineers. So we'll start with a little intro and agenda on what we'll cover today. The intro into our organization, our mission is to increase acceptance and understanding of beavers to support healthier and more resilient ecosystems. We do that in a variety of ways. We do a lot of outreach, education, and training. We also do a lot of on-the-ground technical assistance, consultation with landowners, and the installation of beaver coexistence devices. We'll get into that more later, but just to give a brief overview of kind of our organization, what we do, not only do we do a lot of education and communication with folks, but we also actually are out in the field doing work almost every day to allow for beavers and people to coexist. We're going to cover beaver ecology and adaptations, the benefits that beavers provide to the ecosystem, and we'll also cover learning to coexist alongside beavers. All right, so Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, is a very large animal, much larger than I think most folks think of. Average size is between 25 and 70 pounds. In our area, they're typically 40 to 60 pounds. So these are large animals. I think a lot of people think of them maybe more like cats or something like that. But they're the size of like a full-grown lab in some cases. So the largest beaver ever found was trapped in Wisconsin about 100 years ago and weighed about 120 pounds. So they're pretty big animals, but a typical adult beaver would be between 40 and 60 pounds and about 3 to 4 feet in length. Beavers have a lot of incredible adaptations that cause them to behave in a lot of different ways. Maybe the most famous of all beaver adaptations and beaver behaviors is their teeth, which allows them to chew through wood. So you can see here just the incredible mandibles that these animals have. They have teeth that are chisel shaped and sharpen on themselves. The reason is because the outside, the front of the tooth is orange. It's actually a special enamel that incorporates iron into the material. So it's basically like steel reinforced teeth. And then the back part is dentin, kind of like what our teeth is made out of. And as the beaver bites, it sharpens itself into a chisel-like shape. Beaver's teeth grow forever. Just like our fingernails keep growing and growing and growing, beaver's teeth keep growing and growing and growing. So every time they take a small bite out of the wood, they don't have to worry about going to the dentist. They do this for a couple of reasons. We'll get into more of their building behaviors later. Of course, they build a lot of amazing things, but they also use wood as one of their primary food sources. So they actually eat the layer right underneath the bark of the tree. It's called cambium, and that's like the active alive cells in wood that grow outward. And they also eat, oh, sorry, whoops. Yeah, so they eat the cambium, the layer right underneath the bark. And they typically chew down a tree, and then they bite all the different smaller branches off, and then strip the cambium and the bark off of each one of those individual branches. So sometimes what you'll see is you'll see a big tree falling over, and all the branches are snipped off, and you'll find branches around the pond that have kind of been discarded, and they've been what we call denuded, so totally bare of any bark. And they kind of eat like corn on the cob. It's pretty cute to see. Sometimes they just chew branches off of shrubs or of lower hanging branches or off of trees. Sometimes they cut down the whole trees. Beavers do all sorts of different things. An amazing thing is that beavers not only have this adaptation to cut down trees, but a lot of trees in our area have adaptations to beavers cutting them down. So a lot of the species that grow in riparian areas or the areas adjacent to wetlands and water bodies have the ability to resprout when they've been cut down. It's a technique called coppicing when humans do it. and it's actually sometimes used to create more of a shrubby tree out of what is maybe a more traditional trunk tree. You can see here a cottonwood on the left, a willow on the right. Some other species that do this that are common in that area are like aspens, alders can do it. But many of the species of trees that grow along beavers that are often eaten by them have evolved this same an adaptation to that pressure that beavers have provided. Some other species of like conifers, like cedars and that sort of thing that beavers do eat sometimes can't do this. But some species around here are very well adapted to living alongside beavers. Other common foods beavers eat include a lot of aquatic vegetation, so like lily pads, bulrushes, or cattails, different kinds of sedges and grasses and things like that. They'll eat all of those. There's an amazing graphic here from a study way back in 1976. It shows how seasonal a beaver's diet can be. In the summer months, June, July, and August, these beavers are eating somewhere between 90 and 100% of their diet is aquatic vegetation and grasses. In the shoulder months and in the winters, as these seasonal vegetation starts to die back, they eat more and more of that wood, that cambium, like I talked about earlier. So the diet does vary across the year and across what's available. Beavers are picky generalists. They can eat just about any vegetation. They don't eat any meat or anything like that. They're herbivores. They can eat just about any vegetation, but they are really choosy. They like certain things and they'll go for those certain things almost exclusively when they're available. Very cute story. You'll see them eating lily pads all the time. What they do is they actually grab the leaves and kind of roll them up like burritos and eat them, which is another really fun and cute thing. So, like I talked about earlier, they cut down wood. Maybe their most famous behavior, other than cutting down wood, is they use that wood to build dams. They build dams out of whatever's available. They build dams out of wood, out of sticks, out of mud and rocks. Those are the kind of the most common and famous things. Sometimes we find dams that are made exclusively out of grass and other things like that. If trash floats up in a stream, like plastic and that sort of thing, beavers find it. They might incorporate that into their dam. The wildest thing I've ever heard is someone that I know, like a friend of a friend, actually found a prosthetic limb in a dam. So that's a pretty wild one. I've never seen anything close to that. But they will use just about anything that seems like a good option to use in their dam. Um, they also build lodges. So here's a classic island style lodge. This is in Kenmore along Lake Washington. You can see where my former colleague here is standing on a dam. And you can see the thing, all the branches that they've eaten. And then you can see their island lodge. The lodges are made out of the same materials. The goal of the beaver is to have a living area above the water and entrances below the water. And what that allows them to do is to have their lodges as inaccessible to any predators as possible. Some of these lodges are huge. This one's visible along the 520 floating bridge in Seattle in Portage Bay. This is about the same length as 3 cars, so about 50 feet across. Very, very large, impressive structure. Been there for absolutely generations of beavers. And it'll probably still be there for generations of beavers after this. They also sometimes, in the absence of materials, or if they're, or in some systems, or for who knows what reasons, they're wild animals. They have their own agency. Build dens instead of lodges. And what that means is they basically burrow into the side of a bank, of a stream, or of a pond, or of a lake, rather than building an island style lodge like maybe you'd picture. Another underrated engineering thing they do is they build lodges, or they build waterways and canals. So they eat through vegetation in the summertime to make it more easy for them to get from one place to another to access more food. And they also dig. They're incredibly good at digging. They can dig these huge canal systems that spread water even further out. So they can access more wood and other food in other areas. You might ask yourself, why go through all this trouble? Why build all these dams? The reason is because beavers are adapted to living in the water, and they feel safest from all predators when they're living or when they're swimming versus on land. If you've ever seen a beaver swimming around, it's very graceful and smooth moving. If you've ever seen one on land, it's kind of like a bowling ball with legs. They're not super effective on land. Some of their adaptations that allow them to feel so comfortable in the water include their fur. They have the densest fur of any mammal. They have what's like this really soft under fur, as well as these longer guard hairs that help keep them dry and warm all year long. So even in the frozen north, beavers can swim in the dead of winter and feel warm and comfortable underwater. They have these huge webbed hind feet that allow them to swim efficiently through the water. They have tails which function in a lot of different ways aquatically. One really obvious way when you see a beaver out in the wild is they slap their tails to communicate. So they'll slap their tails to communicate to another beaver that there's maybe a predator around or something that they're unsure of. And it might also be to scare that predator or that potential, whatever it may be, away. So in our case, when we see one, pretty often they'll slap their tails at us. They also act as a rudder when they're swimming underwater. Beavers swim with huge branches, sometimes up to 20 or 30 feet long, and they need something. They need to use their rudder as a tail. Sorry, their tail as a rudder to keep them moving in the right direction when they're dragging these large branches behind them. All that to say, beavers build dams because they're very, very well adapted to living in the water. And they are so adapted to living in the water that there are no predators in our area that can get an adult beaver when it's in the water. That is not true when it's on land. Historically, they had many predators, including wolves, cougars, sometimes bobcats for the younger beavers. Otters can sometimes get younger beavers, birds of prey. But in the water, there aren't any animals in our area that are both large enough and good enough swimmers to get an adult beaver. There are some doppelgangers in the Pacific Northwest that you might find. So here's a beaver, like I said, 25 to 70 pounds, often 40 to 60 pounds as an adult. Here's a muskrat. You can imagine how that looks a lot like a small beaver swimming through the water. The key way to tell them apart is that they're way smaller, 2 to 4 pounds. Of course, the baby beavers are about this size, but they have flat tails. And all the other animals that you'll see here have round tails. That's the other way I tell them apart. Same thing with the nutria. Muskrats are native to our region. Nutria have been introduced by people. They do cause some ecological problems, but they look a lot like adolescent beavers swimming through the water. They're about that size. Once again, they have a round tail and they have these really distinctive white whiskers that can make it easier to tell apart. But with that said, if you just see it out in the wild, it might be harder or even impossible to tell, even for someone like me that is trained in this. Some other interesting animals that sometimes look like beavers, or maybe people think so. Here's a mountain beaver. This is a weird animal that I didn't know about until pretty recently. They're not beavers, and they don't really live high up in the mountains. They are uh, a very unique rodent. They're not really closely related to any other extant rodents. They're maybe closely related to squirrels compared to beavers, but they're not particularly related to squirrels either. People call them mountain beavers, I think because they kind of cut down like ferns and stuff and drag them around. And they don't live in the water, but they live near the water. So it's kind of a misnomer, but they're interesting creatures. They live in a lot of really, like ferny slopes all around our region. So if you're ever around like the ferny slopes, keep your eye out for these little guys. I've never seen one. I'd love to see one, but maybe someone here has. River otters are sometimes mistaken for beavers. They're more similarly sized to beavers than some of the other animals here, but they move. You can just kind of tell that they're an otter because of the way they move. They're very agile and quick. They roll and twist and turn in the water where a beaver just kind of cruises. Um, and once again, they have round tails. Another way to tell them apart sometimes is that they are carnivores or maybe omnivores. They are often eating fish, amphibians, that sort of thing. Sometimes I think people see what they think is a beaver eating a fish, and it's really a river otter. That's not to say that it's not. Even though beavers are herbivores, it's possible that they could maybe one sees a salmon or something and takes a bite. So that's kind of a debate. We often hear people say, "I saw a beaver eating a salmon." I'm like, well, maybe, but I'm not 100% sure. All right, so we'll move into the benefits of beavers. So beavers are ecosystem engineers, like I mentioned, but you may have heard that term, you may not have. The question is like, what does that really mean? To me, being an ecosystem engineer means they have the ability to create entirely new ecosystems out of the ones that currently exist. Very few animals have that ability. People and beavers are really the only ones I know in the Pacific Northwest that can do it on such a scale. Um, and they do that through their dam building activities. The reason why we care about uh, the dams is that the dams create really, really complex wetland habitat. These beaver ponds and complexes have areas of deep water and shallow water, and they have areas of saturated soils because beavers are constantly changing the vegetation. They're allowing different amounts of light to filter in different areas. And all those different niches allow different plants to grow, allow different animals to live, and those different plants and different habitat, micro habitats within one area allow for a plethora of different species to call it home. So this is actually one site that we manage out in King County called Big Spring Creek. I'm actually going out there to check up on our devices tomorrow. And you can see all these incredible animals that are calling this one beaver pond home. And that's not even accounting for all the amazing plants that call it home, too. Beavers also provide amazing benefits to fish. Uh, One of the most important ways is that they provide foraging habitat to juvenile fish. So, salmon, of course, live out in the ocean. They migrate upstream to reproduce. And then the babies need to get back out. The juvenile baby salmon need to get back out to the ocean. And on their way, they need to get big and strong. Otherwise, they won't make it. So, beavers provide places of rest and refuge for fish of all species, but particularly juvenile salmon. And they also increase the amount of invertebrates and foraging habitat for these fish. So, a species of salmon like coho that can live in our freshwater streams for up to 2 years before they migrate back out to the ocean, in some circumstances, need beaver dams and beaver ponds to relax and eat and get big to survive and have an increased survival rate in the ocean. Beavers also provide incredible benefits to water quality. I think this is one of the most incredible things that beaver dams do. Here's a great case study from Dr. Katie Holzer, who is a watershed scientist for the city of Gresham down in Oregon. The city of Gresham had this unique created man-made wetland system that is like a stormwater treatment facility. You can see here on the right, this photo, it's a very, urban area. It's impervious surfaces and roads and houses and warehouses that are draining water directly into this wetland. And that's resulting in this being laden in pollutants before it moves into Fairview Lake. Well, a few years ago, beavers moved in and completely changed the hydrology of this system, meaning that the water did not move through it the way that the engineers designed. Rather than having this kind of long flowing back and forth channel, it simplified it into a series of dams. And initially, the thought was we need to get these beaver dams out. But because it was a water quality facility, we are able to actually take a look at the data and make an informed decision. So here was the performance of the stormwater wetland before the beavers moved in. You can see it's reducing a significant amount of mercury, copper, all these heavy metals. And with that said, it wasn't doing so great with these excess nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and the sediments. But it was improving the water quality without a doubt coming from this industrial area. And here was the water quality results after beavers moved in. You can see across the board, the beavers were doing significantly better at reducing the amount of material of these contaminants in the water. I think the sediment is really telling the story here. Sediment is suspended in the water column and ends up catching a lot of these other um, um, you know, uh, contaminants. And when that drops out of the water column, it can really improve the water quality. Beavers also provide amazing water storage benefits. This can be beneficial in times of flooding and storms, as well as in times of drought and wildfire. So you can see here on the right an image. This is from the Sharps Fire in Idaho. It was an incredibly hot burning fire. The entire valley was decimated except for the beaver complex in the bottom of this valley. You can imagine if this was just a single traditional, what you'd think of as a classic mountain stream, that there'd be very little area saved. But because the beavers have spread the water out and created this large complex wetland, it provided refuge for animals to survive this fire. Uh, Wetlands also can reduce flooding downstream by spreading water out over a wider amount of area. They can reduce the amount of water that goes downstream over a short period of time, and that results in less flooding downstream. So, as climate change continues to create more intense droughts, more intense storms, and more intense wildfires, we really think that beavers are going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting for us in our urban and in our rural and mountain watersheds. So we really, really think of beavers as a climate change mitigation tool because they provide ecosystem resilience by increasing biodiversity, by improving water quality in watersheds, and by mitigating the impacts of wildfires, of drought, and of flooding and severe storms. All right, let's talk about learning to coexist because talking about all the benefits of beavers and how cool they are, it might seem like an obvious um, thing to do. And I want to recognize that beavers and indigenous peoples in North America have lived together for millennia. You can see here on the left is a Tlingit totem from Southeast Alaska featuring a beaver. On the right is a modern interpretation by a Haida artist who is a group of people from British Columbia. And across North America, beavers have been featured in indigenous peoples' stories, in um, creation stories and myths, and all sorts of really important things culturally. And even if that wasn't the case, they lived together and harvested beaver for meat and fur in a respectful and sustainable way. That all changed in the 1500s with the advent of European colonization. Let's take a moment to think about what the landscape looked like before colonization. There were between 100 and 400 million beavers across North America. They were changing virtually every single waterway, every single stream, every single creek across North America, from the Arctic Circle all the way down to northern Mexico in the Sonoran Desert. By 1900, beavers had been trapped to near extinction to the point where there were an estimated 100,000 beavers left in North America. So from the 1500s to the 1900s, the population of beavers went from maybe 400 million to 100,000 as the two extremes, with more moderate guesses being 100 million to 1 million. So absolutely decimated. Luckily, beavers are making a comeback. Beavers now occupy almost the entirety of that same stretch of habitat from the Arctic Circle to northern Mexico. And the estimates currently are between 6 and 15 million beavers. My guess is it's probably between 10 and 15 million beavers living in this area. But we built all of our infrastructure when the map looked like this. So we built our roads, our homes, our everything when the map was like this, and there were maybe 100,000 to a couple million beavers, and that can lead to some serious challenges. Beavers often block infrastructure or they flood infrastructure like roads, like houses. And I think it's really important that we don't minimize these impacts. I mean, if your basement floods, then you have a serious problem, and that's going to affect your livelihood. If you live up the road from this place where the road's underneath 6 inches of water, and you have a medical emergency, you might not be able to make it to the hospital. These are real serious issues. So we try and think of coexisting with beavers as trying to find a compromise with them. On the one hand, in the past, we may have just removed beavers completely. Now we try and find a middle ground that will allow the beavers to keep providing those incredible benefits we were talking about earlier, while also maintaining the critical infrastructure that beavers or that beavers are impacting. So that might mean that things don't look the same. We often hear that from folks. Wow, but it never used to look like this. Well, maybe not 30 years ago, but 100 years ago it probably did. But regardless, maybe we can find a middle ground where your house is okay, where the road isn't flooding, but we're still providing some amount of space for the beavers to live and for all those other incredible species to live. There's a lot of different tools that we have to provide that compromise. This example is called a pond leveler or a beaver deceiver. It's basically a big pipe that we build through the beaver dam with a cage on the upstream end. Water gets sucked through this pipe, and the theoretical level of the pond is about equal with the bottom of this pipe. These aren't perfect. Sometimes, like in really flashy watersheds, so like where there's a huge spring runoff high up in the mountains, these can just be ripped out completely in like a high flow event. So they're not perfect, but in many circumstances, this is a great tool to mitigate flooding, to manage the level of the pond, to keep the beavers able to live and survive and provide the benefits while preventing damage to people's homes and infrastructure. Here's a little diagram showing kind of the pipe and the cage. Another tool that we have is called a notch exclusion fence. This is basically where we just take a chunk out of the dam and build a very special fence around it that makes it more difficult for the beavers to repair that dam. Once again, it's going to be set at a level that's acceptable to the beavers and acceptable to the people. These devices require a little bit more maintenance, but in some cases where there's concerns about salmon and other fish passability, these devices sometimes are viewed as a better compromise, not only for the beavers and the people, but also for the fish that call this same environment home. So you might ask, how do we decide what we're going to put in? Well, generally, what we do is we consult with the WDFW, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife habitat biologists who permit these structures, and we talk to them about what's going on in the system, the beavers, other species like salmon that they're experts on, and decide what is the best solution for the environment in that circumstance. Also do culvert protection. It's similar to a notch exclusion fence, but for a culvert. We often like to say that a culvert is seen by a beaver as a perfectly good dam with a small hole in it. They say, thank you, people, for building this. I'll take it from here. They're really good at plugging these up. So we try and build special fences that are three-sided, including a bottom that makes it difficult for the beavers to dig underneath. And that can stop the beavers from blocking culverts. We also do tree protection. A lot of times people try and do this at home. We try and guide them on how to do it. Chicken wire isn't going to cut it. These are big animals. They're 40 to 60 pounds and 3 feet tall. So you need a tall fence, and you need to make sure that you're providing a compromise again, that the important species that you care about or that are important to the environment in that area are protected, while also allowing for the beavers to forage other species. Another one is a beaver dam analog. This is meant to provide the benefits of beavers where there are no beavers. Often this is done ahead of reintroduction of beavers. We don't do a whole lot of this, but a great example of this is the Stillaguamish River. The Stillaguamish tribe has installed a lot of these beaver dam analogs with the hopes of naturally recruiting beavers, but also providing that foraging habitat to juvenile salmon. They're really focused on the salmon habitat high in the watershed that the juvenile salmon need, and they understand that beavers are such an integral part of that ecosystem that even when there aren't beavers, we need to be providing some sort of beaver substitute in the hopes that beavers will come sometime down the road. Another great partner we have is the Tulalip tribes. The Tulalip Beaver Project relocates beavers from nuisance areas in the city to high up in the Snohomish watershed for the same reasoning that beavers are an integral keystone species for the salmon and other important species that the Tulalip tribes care about. They also, of course, care about the beavers themselves, but this is really motivated by salmon restoration. Um, Sometimes coexistence isn't a viable option, and that's generally when we turn people to relocation. We always like to say never count your money out when beavers are at the table. Beavers are dedicated animals. They will try everything they possibly can to defeat these devices. These devices require maintenance sometimes, and they also sometimes require adaptive management. So here's an example where where a landowner hadn't maintained the device well. So we decided the best option was to extend that device and rebuild part of it. So they're dedicated animals. They'll do everything they can to try and defeat it. But once again, we're trying to find a compromise to make sure that we're saving people's critical infrastructure and still allowing them a place to live. Similar situation with a pond leveler. Sometimes we have to lower those over time to find a better compromise. You might ask yourself, why go through all this work? This is really challenging stuff. I mean, I love it. It's super fun, but it's hard work. It involves long, long days in the water. It involves getting wet all days of the year, whether it's January, February, or if it's hot in March and April. And it really is because we think that it's so important to find a compromise with beavers to promote the ecosystem resilience that they provide. So that's my presentation. Thank you all very much for listening to me. Let me figure out how to pull up Zoom. All right. Now is a great time for questions if anybody has any.
So Marcia, would you unmute Marcia?
Is there any danger with the filtration, with the higher levels of pollution that is now existent in the water that's going into the beaver dams, of as it filters out, of damaging the beavers?
To my knowledge, no. And the reason being that all that pollution already exists in the water that they live in. And they're very resilient creatures. I'm not going to say for sure that there isn't any challenge to that. I'm not an expert in that particular um, setting, but all of the pollution is already in the water that they're living in. So I've never seen or heard of any circumstance where that is posing a problem to the health of the beavers personally.
Joe, we have a question that was put in the chat from Lisa. How deep do beavers need pond to lodge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that can vary pretty widely depending on the beaver. Each one's unique. Each family of beavers is unique. So it's hard to say for sure. One of the ways that we try and check and limit how much we're lowering the level of the water is to look for their lodge and to measure the distance between the lodge, the top of the water, and the lodge entrance. Beavers will, if you expose the entrance to their lodge, then they will do almost everything that they can to raise the water level above that. Because, like I said, they feel threatened if the lodge is exposed to the air. The lodge opening is exposed to the air because they think that a predator can access them more easily. So that's generally the limit that will drop the water level, is to to make sure that the lodge entrances are still fully submerged.
Thank you.
One thing I'll say is beavers do prefer at least like 3 feet of water too at the deepest, but that varies a lot too, depending on the pond. And beavers are good at digging. So sometimes even when the water is a little bit lower, they might dig it out. They might raise the water a little bit. It really does vary in every situation.
Jim, I see you have a question. Jim Mead.
Hi, Jim. I can't hear you.
Jim, you may need to increase your volume. Looks like you have.
Jim, if you type that question in the chat too, then we can go to that one next too. But for some reason, I can't hear you.
Terry, I see your hand.
So we live next door to the Grace Cole Park in Lake Forest Park, and the beaver has actually come into our yard and taken from our trees. So I'm wondering, how far away do they go from their den to get wood?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Grace Cole Park is an interesting situation. We actually do have a contract with the city of Kenmore to install an additional device in Grace Cole Park coming up in the next couple weeks. So that is on the horizon for us. To answer your question, though, that really depends. I've seen estimates of up to 300 feet, so 100 yards. It might be more, it might be less. I've also seen that the behavior of beavers changes dramatically depending on how much pressure they feel from predators. So, if they're in an area where they feel threatened by a cougar or they can smell wolves or something, they might not venture very far at all. In an urban setting where they don't really feel like there's many predators around, they may go who knows how far, very far. And there are some circumstances when they're migrating out. They migrate when they're about 2 years old away from their parents' lodge, where they've traveled like even a mile or more over land to get to a new
Oh,
stream. That's very
wow.
uncommon. One caveat, though, that I like to add with all of this is that all of the research we have into beavers is also from a time when their numbers are historically low. So all of their behaviors are likely to change to some degree as all of the habitat niches, um, become filled. So, you know, everything we have, all the data we have is important, but might change over time.
Doug, you have a question.
Yeah, are there any tree species that they will not cut down?
Absolutely. So, like I said, they earlier, they're picky generalists, so they can eat just about any tree species, but they are very selective. So, I actually do have a list somewhere of tree species that they like and ones that they don't. But ones that they really don't like are like Douglas firs. Sometimes you'll see them cut down a Douglas fir, but they won't eat it all. They'll ring it around it at the edge of the stream, and been it's been suggested that they're actually doing some form of like cultivation. Like they're killing the trees, whether it's intentional or not. They're killing the trees that they don't like, and then that allows for more habitat for species that they do like to come in. So that's pretty incredible. Intentional or not, who knows? But it is an incredible thing. Some other species they don't like. They don't really like nine bark. They don't really like salmonberry. Those are they don't really like. They're kind of iffy on um what's the word I'm looking for? Dogwood. Although they will eat dogwood for sure. They're iffy on vine maple. Those are some of the species that we see commonly growing in riparian areas that they don't go for. There's actually an incredible paper by a woman named Jen Vanderhoof, and she works for King County, and it's planning for beavers, and it's targeted at restoration professionals to plan for beavers before they arrive. So that means planting in different densities. It means planting different species in different areas. Sometimes it means planting some like live stake trees that are just going to get eaten, and then having other ones that that they might not eat. So there is like a whole manual out there for practitioners to try and account for. But off the top of my head, those are some of the ones that I know they don't like. And the reason why I know that is because when I'm out in the field and I see salmonberry in a dam, they've never eaten the bark off of it. They just chew it down and stick it right in the dam. They don't really like the way it tastes. And then some other species like cottonwoods, like aspens, they almost exclusively eat the bark off those because it's something that they really, really enjoy to eat.
I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
there was a windstorm in Seattle recently.
Yeah,
Will
I
they
live here,
only
so
take live trees or will they take the dead branches?
so that's a good question. They won't eat like truly dead branches. So the reason being is that they eat, like I said, they eat the cambium layer, which is the living tissue. It's actually meristematic tissue. So just like trees have like like stem cells at the very top that allow them to grow up, they have stem cells around the trunk that allow them to grow out each year, which is how they get growth rings. That's how you can keep track of how old the tree is. That meristematic tissue is alive, and the rest of the wood is dead cells. So once the tree's dead, they won't want to eat it. Now they're wild animals, so they might try a bite or have a little bit of it, or they might just eat it all. But it's unlikely that they would because it wouldn't provide them with any nutrition. With that said, there's a period of time after the branches fall off the trees that they might still taste good to the beavers and provide nutrition. So they certainly do eat branches that just fall off of trees sometimes.
Well, they want them fresh.
They want them fresh. That's right. They're a lot like us sometimes.
So Jim, it looks like you might be ready to ask your question.
Oops, still can't hear you.
Still can't hear you, Jim. Sorry.
Wait, what? We heard something.
Get closer to his microphone.
No, sorry.
Like I said,
Yeah.
Jim, too, if you want to try and type it in the chat, someone else can, I can read it there and answer it. Happy to do that.
So Joe, David has raised his hand.
Great.
My question is, does the speed of the water in the creek deter the beaver? Or is there a fast-moving creek that deter them from, do they
Yeah.
prefer slow-moving creeks or?
Totally. So beavers are very adaptable. They can live in many different places, but there is like ideal habitat for them. I think the things that go into that the most are, like you said, the speed of the water. So if the stream is too steep and the water's coming at them too fast, they are less likely to build in a place. If the valley is too steep, so if they build a dam and it's only going to flood a very small amount of area behind it, they're less likely to build there. If it's really wide, it might be impossible for them to build all the way across, or in like a very large river system, it might be impossible for them to build all the way across. In a large river system, that means that they don't need to build a dam, and they won't. They'll just build a lodge or a bank den and just hang out. Same thing in lakes like Lake Washington. You'll see beavers all over the place in Lake Washington, but they can't build any dams, so they don't, and they don't need to. There's actually a really interesting paper. There's two kind of competing papers and models that are used in this field. One's called the BIP, which is the Beaver Intrinsic Potential Tool, and one is called the BRAT, which is the Beaver Reintroduction Assessment Tool. And what they basically do is they take all the data from like a GIS, from like a satellite mapping system, and they assess vegetation. They assess the steepness of the bank, the width of the valley, and a few other factors, and it assigns a number to say, all right, is this likely good beaver habitat or is this likely poor beaver habitat? Now, with that said, we see beavers all over the place. Sometimes they build in places that you're like, why would you choose to do that? But they're thriving and they're doing great. Like an example of that is like an agricultural ditch. They build in agricultural ditches all the time where they build, a dam. It's barely flooding anything, but they're happy and they're doing their thing. And sometimes there's like amazing habitat and people will relocate beavers to that spot. And before you know it, they're gone. It's like, this is perfect habitat. Why wouldn't you stay here? They're wild animals. They have their own agency. So you can never predict with 100% accuracy.
Christina has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. What is the family structure or the living situation of beavers? Are they kind of like to live around others, or are they kind of solitary animals? And what does their dens look like? How many beavers might live in like that lodge on Lake Washington that is 3 car lengths long? Is it like
Totally.
one chilling up in a mansion, or?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked that. So beavers are very social animals and they're family oriented. So beavers live in a mating pair that typically mate for life. And they have a set of kits almost every single year. What I'm talking about is all ideal conditions. So in ideal conditions, beavers will mate for life and they'll have a set of kits every year. That set of kits is generally between 1 and 4. Most common number is 2, but it can be as high as 9. But generally, 2 kits per year is kind of a typical situation. And those kits live with the family for, on average, somewhere around 2 years. So the first year, they're just kind of learning the ropes as babies. And the second year, they're helping to rear that next set of kits to help mom and dad build the lodge, make repairs to the dams, whatever that may be, collect food for the family. So they live in groups. We say 6 is probably a pretty typical family size, but it might be as few as one singular beaver hanging out. It might be as many as 10 or more if they're really productive beavers. And then when they're 2 years old, they migrate out. They go um, sorry, when they're 2 years old, they migrate out and find a place of their own to build a dam and to raise their own family. So a kind of an incredible thing is that sometimes mom and dad will actually recognize their children that like come back. So beavers are very territorial animals to other beavers, not to other species, but to other beavers. And they will defend their territory. Except for there have been anecdotally some stories where the previous generations will come back. You know, maybe mom and dad kicked them out a little too early and they're having a hard time, and they'll actually welcome them back temporarily, maybe have a snack and hang out for a few days before they head back out. So it's a pretty interesting family dynamic. And with that said, every rule has an exception. Like I've said a few times now, beavers have their own agency. They're wild animals, and every rule that I come up with or that biologists come up with is bound to be broken because of that.
You might ask everybody.
So Tom has raised his hand, Tom Harvey.
In the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Tom.
All right. So I have a couple questions. First of all, I live close to Forbes Creek on Lake Washington, where there's extensive beaver work. And you can see their dam building very clearly there. And I've gone down at night a few times, but I've never been able to catch the beavers doing stacking the mud up and building, maintaining their dike. And I'm curious if you have any tips on a good time of day or night to actually see them at work on their dam.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most common time to see beavers in our area is going to be in the summer, right at sunset. Reason being, beavers are nocturnal. They typically are kind of awake for similar hours throughout the year. So in the summertime, 8 o'clock rolls around. It's still kind of light out, but the beavers are kind of itching to get out and start their day. So 8 p.m. rolls around. They'll typically start to kind of come out. If you know where the lodge is, that's a great place to see them. And they'll kind of cruise around. And by 8:30 or 9 o'clock, when it's still light out in the peak of summer, they'll be out. They might not be repairing their dam. They'll probably be collecting food and eating it and just kind of surveying their area.
Yeah, I've seen them quite frequently, just as you described. But
Gotcha.
the dam building, I haven't had any.
I've never seen one building a dam either, to be honest, except for like on videos.
Right.
So I unfortunately I don't know for sure the answer to that question.
I have one other question. There in that particular habitat, it's very marshy, kind of solid ground with puddles in it. and you'll see a beaver out kind of in the middle of the field, it looks like, with a puddle. He or she will dive into the puddle and disappear. And
Yeah.
there's no other water close by. And I wonder if you have any light to shed on how long their tunnels are and how big their tunnel networks get.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can be quite extensive. And this is going to vary a lot in kind of more urban settings compared to more like rural settings, more pristine habitat. I've heard stories from researchers that um, have been keeping track of the same beaver complexes up in the mountains for generations. And the beavers kind of use the past canals and lodges as clues. They come in, they come into those and they keep digging them out and out and out. So they can be quite extensive. They can go for a very long ways, a couple hundred feet, I would say, at least. With that said, if there isn't that much space, they won't do that. Or if they don't feel the need to, they won't do that. Or if they live in an area where they can't stay established for that long, then they're likely to be shorter. With that said, it's not surprising me you see them kind of go into the water and use the tunnels to get to a different area because they can eat through whatever aquatic vegetation or roots or whatever, dig through or eat through that to form a tunnel underneath that. So that's a pretty cool thing that you're able to see there.
I have a question here. I think I've got Jim on speakerphone
Okay,
here.
great.
Maybe it'll work.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I've Zoom a lot, and for some reason I can't chat, and I he can't hear me on the audio.
No worries. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm the park steward at Gray Skull Park. We've had our beavers there for 4 years. There's 4 of them, and we're trying to stay ahead of the cutting down of trees. They're drowning the whole area in there. And I have been advocating for a beaver deceiver for quite some time, but it seems that Fish and Wildlife has prevented that. And I want to know how to get around that. I've worked with Alyssa from Beavers Northwest, and so far we have nothing. But they need to be managed because they're flooding the whole bottom area in there, killing some very significant trees. Not only cutting them down, but drowning whole groves of trees.
Yeah.
For Terry over there, the neighbors, right? I was out the Beavers Northwest presentation where they used an electric fence to protect from the beavers coming up and eating the vegetables in the garden. So that's something that might work for them. But have you heard of that?
I have heard of some folks doing that. I don't have any personal experience with it. And at Beavers Northwest, we don't personally do that, but I have heard that that's an effective tool, particularly in agricultural cropland and that sort of thing. I would recommend just kind of fencing around individual trees in those circumstances. With that said, Jim, I would be happy to put you in contact with my colleague who manages that project at Grace Cole Park. That's not my role, so my ability to answer questions about it is limited. With that said, I know that they're putting in a notch exclusion fence, which is a different style of device. And we are limited in doing what we can based off of what WDFW will permit. If WDFW isn't willing to permit something in an area, then they're the authority in that area. Like I said, though, I'd be happy to get. I can if I can get your phone number. I can. If someone can send it to me after this, I'd be happy to put you in contact with the person that's responsible for that project on my team.
Yes, I think I did put that in the chat to you, and not sure, was it Marcia that connected me with my phone here?
Gotcha. I think I do see your the chat now. So I see your number there. So I'd be happy to pass your information along. course, my colleagues are all they're all done for the day today, so it won't be today. It might be a little later this week, but yeah, I'd be happy to pass your information along for them to reach out.
Thank you. Let's see, Matt.
Thank you. I work with Jim at Grace Cole.
Great.
And one of the things I'm curious about is one of the big interests in Grace Cole and around the whole region is, as we all know, is salmon recovery. And I'm wondering how beavers relate to that. Like, for example, a simple question, is a beaver dam create a barrier to or to a salmon, or does it have no trouble getting up this upstream? I'm sure that the ponds are good for the salmons, but I'm wondering about the dams.
Yeah, absolutely. That is honestly a very complex question. So let me start by saying, in a historical setting, there's really no evidence that beavers pose any real issues to migrating salmon. Reason being that beaver dams, for one, are porous. They have areas that fish can actually migrate directly through. Even some of our very unathletic salmon, like chum salmon, that aren't very good at jumping, are able to get through a beaver dam historically, and in most circumstances. Sometimes that means they have to wait a little bit. It's not uncommon for fish to have to wait for a rainstorm to get upstream of certain barriers, whether that is a beaver dam or some other blocking of the stream. That may be a small waterfall, rocks, logs, something like that. That's a pretty common scenario in a natural system. What really complicates things is the fact that we have modified almost every stretch of every stream heavily as humans. And where we see some challenges are when beavers, human, and salmon all come together. So historically, a beaver builds a dam. It might make a small challenge for the fish to get around. However, a natural system, when it rains, the beaver dam's full and water flows around the edges or over the top or through. But in a system where where people have channelized it, have dug out the channel to a place where no water can flow around the edge of a beaver dam, or have put in culverts that beavers are incredibly good at blocking, or have a road adjacent and a prism of a road that creates an effective barrier on one side, that can create a place that's impermeable, that's very difficult for salmon to get through. With that said, there are circumstances, even where it seems like it shouldn't be true, that salmon get through fine through beaver dams. And the way we know that is because there are beavers, or there are salmon upstream of these dams. So it's a complicated question without just a 100% straightforward answer. But I would say certainly historically, beavers did not pose any challenges. But now that we've kind of complicated the ecosystem, the answer is a little more complex.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what a lot of information. Yes, for sure.
You.
I also want to thank the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation for showing up.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah, once again for your hard work in publicizing our talk this evening. Appreciate
And
you.
if you all enjoyed this and you are not already on our mailing list, please drop your email into the chat and we are happy to add you to our list.
Absolutely. And I will say too, I'm putting my email in the chat. So if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to get in touch, feel free to write that down and to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk separately.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
I'm on my wife's laptop now.
There we go.
Never mind. All right. I had a lot to say, but I guess I missed my opportunity.
Wow. Well, you're right there up close and personal with your neighbors, Terry and stuff. So
yeah, So I've talked to him. It was last year, I think I talked to him.
Right.
I just wanted to say that I've just finished reading the book Beaverland by Lila Phillips, and it's more than you ever want to know about beavers, perhaps. But it's a great read. It's interesting, and I recommend it.
Yeah, I really enjoy that too, because I think it paints a great, it's a complex portrait that it paints. It's not just, black and white. There's a lot that goes into it. And also does a great job of getting into the history. The fact that beavers, weren't only integral to the shaping of the United States physically and how the water moves through the ecosystem and how that, changes the ecosystem itself, but also how the fact that there were beavers and beavers were in demand shaped the founding and the expansion of the United States and the consequences that had. So I would agree. That's a very interesting book.
Joe, it looks like we have one more. Lisa Wood, would you like, there we go.
Great.
Yeah, my question is, Joe, does Beavers Northwest keep track of where there are beavers? I have a beaver dam on my property in Kenmore. Not a lodge yet that I know of.
Gotcha.
Do you keep track of that?
We don't really have just like a anything like that. We do have like a place where we map some places to see beavers on our website, but that's really publicly accessible, like parks and that sort of thing in the Seattle area. So sometime in the future, we might do things like beaver surveys, like people do salmon surveys. We are trying to get into a little more research. Right now, we have a water quality project going on that's kind of cool. But right now, at this time, we're not really keeping track in that way.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you for everything tonight. It's been very informative. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining. I really do appreciate everyone's time. And it's always fun to talk to people and answer questions. So thank you all.
Cool.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.